Hello everyone, my name is Zach Mazurek, and this is the Diocese of Marquette Seminarian Reflection video series. Thanks for joining me today on this fourth Sunday of Advent, where we have these just fantastic readings that we are able to hear and to ponder as we prepare for Christmas. And so one of the things from this gospel is from Luke's gospel, chapter 1, the gospel from today. It starts with, "In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a town of Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to the man named Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And coming to her, he said, 'Hail, favored one, the Lord is with you.' But she was greatly troubled at what was said, and pondered what sort of greeting this might be." Now, when you just heard me read those words, you may have already begun to kind of tune out, right? Like sometimes we hear these stories at Christmas time or even throughout the year. When we hear a gospel or we hear a story of Jesus' life, sometimes we kind of just think, oh yeah, I've heard that before. I know this story. I know what happens next. You don't have to, you just stop reading right there, Father. We know what you're going to say, right? There's this sense of kind of yeah, I know that. I know the story. But I think that's kind of where the mistake is. Sometimes we think maybe that, maybe if they read something different, then maybe I would get something more out of it. But the problem isn't with, the gospel story or the word of God, but the problem is, lies within, the hardness or, the kind of staleness of our hearts. That we think, oh yeah, I've heard that before, and then we kind of just move on. We just don't think that the Lord has anything that he wants to give us through the words because we've already heard them before, because I've heard this story since I was in elementary school, or since I was a kid, right? I've heard these stories before. I know what happens, right? But the power of the Word of God isn't that it's just something that's static that we just read one time or that we hear proclaimed at Mass, but we know that it's living and effective, that it moves in our hearts, that Jesus came, the Word made flesh, not just to live in one singular moment in history, but that his life and his actions last for eternity, that his life, death, and resurrection wasn't just one singular moment in history that we just kind of read about and then it's just like any other person who lived, right? There's something about his life that it wants to dwell. He came to dwell with us and in us so that we may one day dwell with him in heaven. One of the quotes about this is that Jesus became man, God became man, so that man may become like God. God became man so that we may become like God, so we may return to him, and Jesus came to do exactly that. And so when we hear the words of the gospel, I invite you just to okay, what is the Lord saying to me right now in my circumstances, in my time, in my place today? That's the power of the scriptures that I think sometimes we can kind of neglect, or especially around Christmas when we think, I've heard this story before, I know what's going to happen. But to follow and imitate, especially what Mary does, and what it says is that she pondered what sort of greeting this might be. And later on in the Gospels, it says how she took what the angel had said to her and she pondered it in her heart. She took all these things and pondered them in her heart. That is what we are called to imitate. Imitate the lead, the example of Mary, of how she took the words of God and pondered them in her heart. And that's what we are called to do today. Because just like in the time of Jesus, things are hard. Our world is tough right now. This has been a hard year for a lot of us. And we may be kind of approaching Christmas and be it's just another holiday where I maybe can't gather with all my family and friends, and maybe it's been a tough year, financially, maybe there's just been a lot of things that have just been thrown at us, a lot of fear, a lot of distress, a lot of worry, and Christmas is just going to kind of add to that. It's just another thing on the list of things that have been maybe kind of hard and bad about this year, right? That can be our attitude. And that's really tempting to think that. But Christmas isn't just another holiday or just about the food that we gather and maybe eat together, or the gifts that we share. But it's beyond that. It lasts forever. It's not just a temporary physical gift that we receive at Christmas where Jesus comes to be with us, but it's something that goes forever. And we see this from the first reading in 2 Samuel, where the prophet Nathan comes to David and he says, "I will establish his royal throne forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. If he does wrong, I will reprove him with a human rod and human punishments, but I will not withdraw my favor from him, as I withdrew it from Saul before you. Your house and your kingdom are firm forever. Before me, your throne shall be firmly established forever. And that's what we hope in, that this world is not all there is. Like, because if it was, then we would have reason to despair or to just like kind of let the fear fill us. But this time of Christmas is a time of hope, is a time of joy and peace that the world can't take away. It's that we trust that our kingdom is not just of this world, but that it is forever in heaven with Jesus, who promised it thousands of years before his birth through the prophets, that he would come to be with us and that his kingdom will have no end. And how does this happen? Because Mary trusted that those words would be fulfilled. Knowing that what the Lord has said will happen, to trust that the kingdom will last forever. And what it says there at the end of the gospel that we heard was that nothing will be impossible for God. And the question is, do we really believe this? Do we really trust that nothing will be impossible for God? Because sometimes we think, well, he can do some miracles, or he does those great things for other people. He did that for Mary. He did that for some of the saints. But me, like, that's not going to happen for me, right? Like, that's not, I can't do that, right? God's not going to do that for me. And that can be what we think, right? Like that can be what kind of sucks the joy out of what Christmas really is, the gift that Jesus wants to give us that isn't just temporary, isn't just physical, but that it's eternal and everlasting, and that he will do the impossible for us. So whatever it is that you may be struggling with right now, whatever it is that you're maybe doubting or you're fearing, or maybe the isolation or maybe depression or whatever it is that, like, the challenges that this year has brought to you, to turn those over to Jesus and to trust in him that nothing is impossible for God. And we can imitate Mary in how she said yes, how she welcomed the word into her heart and then physically brought him into the world as the Son of God, the Word made flesh. To trust that he came so that we may have life and have it more abundantly, that we may have joy and our joy may be complete, not just a little, but all of the joy that he wants to give us, this Christmas. That's what our hope is in. That's why we can celebrate, even when the world would tell us, you still have to stay isolated. You still have to, that you can't really be happy. But you can't, because the joy of the Lord is complete, and that's what he desires to give to you today and this Christmas. So my prayer for you is that we may trust in that fact, trust that he is the gift that keeps on giving. He is the gift that really, really matters this Christmas, to open our hearts to him, to ponder the word in our hearts, and to trust in his word, that his kingdom will last forever, and that nothing will be impossible for God. I pray that we may imitate the words of Mary, as she said at the end of this gospel, that brought Jesus into the world. Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be done unto me according to thy word. Let us imitate Mary by saying these words to the Lord, that we may imitate her, that we may let the Lord enter fully into our hearts, to trust in him this Christmas, and to know that he has a plan for us, that nothing will be impossible for God. Know my prayers for you and your family and all of your loved ones, especially during this time, but to trust that the Lord will come and he is going to be present for us today and always, especially this Christmas, to know and trust in his great plan and love for you. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. May God bless you and bless me too.